It was another big weekend on the road to the Kentucky Derby with three races across the country that contributed points towards qualification for the Derby, and several horses running that will not only run in the Derby but be serious contenders. So I want to discuss that and then discuss the one upcoming race this weekend for the Derby, which will be the Arkansas Derby. So the three races this past Saturday were the Wood Memorial, the Bluegrass, and the Santa Anita Derby. Three really good races, three good fields, and the winner of all three got 100 points towards qualification. And the runner-up also received 40, which will almost assuredly be enough to qualify if they weren't already in. Some of them were likely already in. So let's get right to it. The Wood, which is in New York, was won by Vino Rosso. Coming to this race, Enticed, who is trained by Kieran McLaughlin, was the favorite, and Enticed and it wound up going Vino Rosso 1, Enticed 2. Vino Rosso wasn't the favorite, but he had pretty good odds to him. They both are interesting horses. So Vino Rosso, he's trained by Todd Pletcher. He was very promising much earlier in the year. You know, he was inexperienced. He only had 2 starts, which he looked good in. But then he ran, and he disappointed a little bit. He actually ran twice, and he disappointed in both of his races a little bit. He wasn't horrible, and you can go back and, you know, at the time when I did these videos and I discussed him, but, you know, he wasn't horrible, but nothing impressive. He didn't win. And it was just like, he's talented, but, you know, maybe he's just taking a while to put it together, or maybe he's not quite as talented as people thought he was. But even coming back into the Wood, he still, like I just mentioned, he had good odds to him. And I thought in this race he ran just pretty much awesome. Ridden by John Velasquez, and he did what he needed to do, and I thought he looked really good. And this was a decent field. It wasn't, you know, like a great field, but it was decent. Enticed is a good horse, and they were definitely in a duel at the end, and Vino Rosso held them off. So I think Vino Rosso, I don't know, and this is kind of a similar point I'll make with Enticed, but I don't know if Vino Rosso is going to be necessarily one of the heavy favorites in the Kentucky Derby, but I think he'll be a contender, and I think he'll be a threat for sure in the race. And I think he's also one that will maybe be a factor in either the Preakness or the Belmont. You know, the Belmont, he'll be back in New York, a different racetrack, but, you know, just the geographic area. So congratulations to Vino Rosso. This was cool to see him, even if not in a Triple Crown race, but even just in the Wood, racing to his potential that I think everyone pegged him at. For Enticed, so just background on Enticed. He ran last year as a 2-year-old and was pretty good, but earlier in the year he was 4th in the Holy Bowl, and he was one of the favorites in that race. So a little bit disappointing there, but then he came back a few weeks ago and won the Gotham at the same racetrack, Aqueduct. And that was a really nice win for him, and that propelled him to be the favorite in the Wood. And again, as I mentioned, he ran decent. I don't think you know, I don't think he's, no one's really criticizing the race that he ran here in the Wood to finish second, and he gave it his all in the stretch. I think, you know, because he definitely has enough points for the Derby, obviously. So I think, you know, assuming he's in the Derby, I think, just like what I talked about with Vino Rosso, I don't think that Entice is going to be one of the top tier heavy favorites. I don't think he's going to be, you know, among the horses that most people are betting on. But I think he'll be a threat in the race for sure. I think, you know, he's one of these horses where it wouldn't shock you if he finished like 3rd or 4th. And then I think he's another one we're looking forward to either the Preakness or the Belmont. And again, with him, you know, look at his Gotham and then the Wood right here. Again, that's in New York. Again, different racetrack, so it's not it's you can't say just because he ran around the Gotham and the Wood that he's gonna run well at Belmont. It is a different track, but it's just important to note that they're both in New York. So Enticed, well done to him to back up his Gotham performance. Yeah, he didn't win, but second, that's fine. And then again, congrats to Vina Rosa, great performance from him. One other thing I'll mention here is Frenzy Fire finished fourth. It would have been helpful for him to finish third because he's right on the border between qualifying for the Derby. It's going to depend on what happens these last 2 weeks. But I thought he actually ran pretty well to finish fourth. He's a horse that, to be honest, I like him a little bit more than most people do. And I do think that there are a lot of people out there that like him, but I do think he's a threat in the Derby if he gets in. Again, I'm maybe not necessarily to win, but to put in a good performance and contend for one of those top 4 spots. And then I think, again, the Preakness or the, maybe not the Belmont. The Belmont might be a little much for him, although we'll see. But then we'll see. Like last year, we saw a couple of horses that came out of the Kentucky Derby that went on to have really nice years running at shorter distances. And I think maybe Frenzy Fire will be in that, but I'm not ready to discount him for any of the Triple Crown races, including the Derby. So we'll see if he gets into the Kentucky Derby. That's one. There's still a few spots that are up for grabs there. So now moving on to the Bluegrass in Kentucky at Lexington. This was a race where Good Magic, the Breeders' Cup Juvenile winner from last year and the 2-year-old champion, this was his return after a disappointing effort in the Fountain of Youth where he finished third. Similar to what I talked about with Vina Rosso, Good Magic in the Fountain of Youth, he wasn't terrible, but he wasn't good, either. Maybe part of that was the racetrack, and also it was his first effort after that juvenile performance, so I'm definitely willing to forgive Good Magic a little bit. Good Magic is a horse that I really like. I've liked him pretty much since that Breeders' Cup Juvenile performance. I could say I liked him before that, but to be honest, I didn't really know much about him before that race. But he impressed me so much in that juvenile performance, and I wanted to see more from him in the Fountain of Youth. But again, right after that race, looking into it, I definitely forgave him a little bit for that because there were circumstances that. And for him to finish third there wasn't terrible either. But I thought in this Bluegrass, he ran great. And this was a decent field. It was a big field, actually. I think there were 14 runners. So, a big field. Again, not necessarily like the most talented field of all time. But a couple of other horses that will probably be in the Derby or could be in the Derby or would be threats in the Derby. Maybe they'll emerge in the second 2 legs of the Triple Crown. Just a decent field here. And I thought Good Magic was the best horse in the race, at least on that day. And for him, this will definitely be his last race before the Derby. But I thought, I think Good Magic, I don't think he's going to be like the morning line favorite. Probably not for the Derby, or maybe not the betting favorite either, once the odds shift. But I think he'll be right up there for sure. There are some people that still aren't too high on him. But Trained by Trad Brown here, I do really like him. I wouldn't necessarily say he's my favorite 3-year-old right now going to the Derby, but he's right up there for me. And this Bluegrass performance was very impressive. And really, he didn't even need to win here to get into the Derby or be considered one of the favorites for the Derby. He could have finished second. So, for him to win, and it was a good, really. It wasn't like he just hung on the win. Like, it was a good performance. Second and third here was Flame Away and Free Drop Billy. 2 horses we've seen a lot on the Derby Trail. For Flame Away, just another solid performance. It's kind of what he's just been doing. He had 1 win and then, a couple of, just solid, I think is the best word. He's not the fastest horse. He's not the most talented horse, but, he always gives an honest effort. And that's a valuable thing when it comes to the Derby and the rest of the Triple Crown races. So, definitely Flame Away, assuming he's in the Derby. I think that'll be interesting. And it's also important to note that he's trained by Mark Casse, who trained Classic Empire last year. So then third, Free Drop Billy. Um, he actually finished fourth, but then a disqualification to the third horse propelled Free Drop Billy to third. Just another solid horse. Always seems to give an honest effort, and if he's in the Kentucky Derby, again, one of these where he's not going to be one of the favorites, but he can have an impact on the race. He's probably not going to be forwardly placed in any of the races, but he has a nice kick at the end when he's on his game, and I think he's a horse where you have to make an account for if he's in the race for the Derby. Okay, so moving on to the third prep from Saturday, and this is how they went in chronological order from the Wood first, and the Bluegrass, and the Santa Anita, which is out in California, so that makes sense. This was the highly, highly anticipated Kentucky Derby prep debut, I guess you could say, for Justify. He had previously run in 2 races, both as a 3-year-old. He didn't run as a 2-year-old, and he looked really good. But there were questions about, the fields that he was facing, of course, in a smaller race that he was in. So he was going up against Bolt D'Oro. It was only a 7-horse field, but Bolt D'Oro, who was for sure one of the best 2-year-olds last year and won his last race against McKenzie, or won by disqualification, but ran really well. And then in Stildregard, who at one point was one of the top 3-year-olds, but then he struggled a little bit, but still is a good horse. But in terms of the actual race, Justify won, of course, and he looked really good. He pretty much had the lead from the start and held on throughout. I thought, while I was impressed, I think it's impossible not to be impressed by the race. At the same time, I wasn't blown away for many different reasons. Number one, it wasn't that fast of a time. And times can be misleading, of course, but, just if you look at the time compared to other races at that distance, it wasn't great. Not bad by any stretch. But the other thing is he didn't have any, what you might call a pace battle or someone vying with him to be on the lead. Everyone just kind of sat back and let him take the lead. And because of that, he didn't have to exert himself early in the race. And that's part of why the time was slow. The reason that maybe is a little bit concerning is he's almost definitely not going to get that trip in the Kentucky Derby. It's going to be not only a better field, but a bigger field. So he's going to have at least 2 or 3 horses that are going to be right up there with him. And he's going to have to duel with them. Assuming that that's what he wants to do in the Derby, is go out to the lead. He might want to sit off a little bit. But it's really just impossible at this point not to be just really impressed by Justify. Again, you can... He's such an interesting case because, as I mentioned, he only had 2 races coming in here, and he didn't race as a 3-year-old. But, he's trained by Bob Baffert, so I think a lot of people just from that will give him the benefit of the doubt on certain things. And again, Bolt D'Oro is a really good horse, and Justify held him off. So forget about the track or the pace scenarios. For him to do that in a race like the Santa Anita Derby, it's very impressive. So Justify will go into the Kentucky Derby, and it's going to be interesting. I think there's a lot of storylines going into the Kentucky Derby, but I think Justify is definitely right at the top of the list, and I don't think it would surprise anyone if Justify winds up winning the race, but he's going to have to earn it. No doubt about that. He's going to have to earn it, and I definitely, for one, I'm excited to see maybe what happens when he gets challenged a little bit more. Not to say he wasn't challenged here. I'm talking more in the sense of a horse up there with him, or several horses up there with him, and how he responds. And he's going to have to dig in and, fight a little bit more than what he had to do in the Santa Anita Derby. But you can't fault a horse for what other horses don't do. So it's not Justify's fault that no one came out and challenged him. He did what he had to do. So, well done to him. For Boltoro, coming off his last performance, which again was that disqualification win, he didn't have to win here. I think a lot of people would have liked him to, and I think if he did win here, he very well might have been the morning light favorite for the Derby. He probably won't be now, but he'll definitely still be one of the main storylines, just like Justify, and I don't think there's reason to think that Boltoro won't be a serious contender, both in the Kentucky Derby and in the other Triple Crown races, depending on which one or both he runs in. So, again, not terrible at all performance from Boltoro here. It's a decent second. So now moving forward, looking ahead, there's only 2 Kentucky Derby preps left, and only one of them is the winner automatically gets in. So, and that's this weekend, the Arkansas Derby. The winner gets 140 to the second place. This is a somewhat familiar field because Magnum Moon and Salamini, who are both in the Derby in terms of points already, they don't need this race in terms of points. This is a little bit of a rematch between them because they both ran in the Rebel. Magnum Moon won, Salamini second. Magnum Moon trained by Pletcher, Salamini by Baffert. And so they're going to meet up again here, but it's not all about them, although I think that they're the 2 heavy favorites here. Quip is a really good horse who won the Tampa Bay Derby and will probably be in the Derby, the Kentucky Derby. Steve Asmussen has a few horses in here, including Combatant, who has run decent in a bunch of Kentucky Derby preps. So I think here Magnum Moon and Salamini, I think have the chance to be among the top, let's say 3 to 4 to 5 favorites for the Kentucky Derby, depending on how they run here. Again, they don't need this race for points. I think Quip, he's in the Derby in terms of points, but I think he could go, if he does run well here, I think he would begin to crack that discussion of maybe being a favorite. But again, those 3 are already in terms of points. So for the rest of the horses in this field, it's an opportunity to potentially get into the Derby. But they're going to have to earn it because those 3 horses look pretty good. So it's very exciting right now. There's so much going on, and I think every year the Kentucky Derby has storylines and is an awesome race, but it kind of feels right now like this one is turning, at least right now, is looking like it could be a really special Derby with a lot of really talented horses, big name trainers, horses that have, Mendelssohn coming out of the UAE Derby, and just a lot of cool and interesting things going on. So, again, the Wood, Bluegrass, Santa Anita this past weekend, and then a huge race coming, the Arkansas Derby. So thanks for watching this video, and talk soon, and enjoy the races that are going on.